Hello and welcome. My name is Tom. This is the Enthusiasm Project Season 7, Episode 3. Oh, gee. I am filled with glee. I don't know. It's Episode 3. I am doing a video version of this episode, so if you're on Patreon or YouTube channel memberships, you can check that out if you want. I am toying with the idea of making older video versions public, just because it's so much work to produce a video version, and it just feels like a lot of work to do. So words are hard. If that's the case, I'll keep everyone updated. The goal, though, is always to give priority to channel supporters. So you'll get it first, you get it early, get all that kind of stuff, and then later on down the line, it can be opened up for everyone. That's kind of an idea I'm toying with. I bring that up because prior to starting this, oh my God, the amount of technical difficulties where I just wanted to throw in the towel were kind of absurd, but I didn't want to do that because I've got two special guests in the studio today, RODECaster Pro I and RODECaster Pro II. They're both here and getting along quite well, despite what you may have heard. No animosity between the old and the new, so I figured since this is the first episode after the official release of the RODECaster Pro II, it only makes sense that I would talk about it, and that's what you're hearing right now. That's what I've been using for weeks now. I guess I've had my RODECaster 2 for about a month, and I've had working firmware, I guess, for about 3 weeks. So at the time I'm recording this, and we'll talk all about that. So I figured what would be a cool thing to do is to start off this episode just by talking about RODECaster Pro II stuff, not necessarily diving into every feature, because if you're listening to this and you're interested in that, I feel like you've probably heard all the features and seen those videos, but to kind of cover some really interesting specific things about it. And then the second part of the episode, I do have some listener submissions. I have a voice submission and several audio submissions that we'll check out and listen to those. And then I would like to talk about the RODECaster Pro II from my point of view as being involved with the launch, because it's really like the first time I've been involved with a product launch. There have been times in the past where like companies will send something and say, hey, this doesn't come out until this date, so don't show it. But you know me and how I feel about embargo stuff, so I'm like, yeah, I don't care. Trust me, don't worry. Like, I'm not lining up to press publish as soon as it's released. So it's usually like, this is coming out, don't tell anyone. And like 2.5 months later, my video comes out about it, if ever. This is different, and I've always said the one exception I would make is the RODECaster Pro II. And so I've actually been talking to Rode about it. I think I can say this now because it's all released and NDAs are over at this point, but since like February. So it's been a very long time now that it's June and the thing is out. And I want to talk about that because that also brought about kind of a moral dilemma in terms of knowing that a new thing is coming out and having tons of people constantly, wanting to buy the existing one and asking if there's a new one coming out. So I kind of want to dive into that side of it because I feel like I learned a lot. And overall, it was just a super awesome experience, and it just made me love Rode even more. So if you thought I was a Rode fan before, oh boy, even more so now. But before we dive into all that, let's talk about this super cool thing, which is incredibly fun to use. This show, The Enthusiasm Project, is why I bought the original RODECaster. So in 2014, I started putting together a podcast setup for a school district I was working for. And we just had, it was sort of like, can you put this together for district administrators to use on like a show that would then be sent to a radio station and broadcast over the radio and then also uploaded as a podcast? So that was where I was trying to create RSS feeds through like our program website. I had just cobbled together equipment. I think we were running 4 shotgun microphones for video into the head of a PA system, like just a cheap PA system, and then running the output of that into a Zoom H4n. That was our podcasting setup. And then I just had splitters on splitters on splitters for headphones so everyone could hear it. And honestly, I think it sounded fine. Like, it actually sounded pretty decent. And it was just a bunch of cheap little mic stands that I had bought myself, and, nothing crazy. Everything was old stuff that we had already had, kind of run down. After we had done that for a while, the school district was like, hey, this is great. It's working really well. You and your students are doing a good job. We'd love to give you the money to upgrade the studio to like an actual dedicated podcasting setup. And I was like, oh boy, that's where I'm going to get those cool boom arms. That's where I'm going to get the Shure SM7B and a super nice mixer and everything. And I think I mentioned this before. I'm using the SM7B right now, by the way, if you're just listening to the audio only version. But it is running into the RODECaster Pro II with no boosters or anything. It's just straight into the mixer with more. I could boost the gain like 20 more decibels if I wanted. But anyway, they gave the SM7B, and that was where I stopped liking the SM7B because I was so excited to have it. And then we got it, and the sound quality was so much worse on the show. But that was my fault because I didn't know how to use the microphone. I didn't know about things like boosters, and the environment we were in was wrong. But it almost made things more complicated because now we had more gear going into a bigger mixer that still had to be run out into like a separate Zoom recorder. And it worked. It worked really well, but it almost was like more of a headache. And then I moved to a new school district, and it was sort of the same thing. Hey, here's an audio thing. Let's set up podcast studio. Okay. I learned a little bit more about SM7Bs and stuff, and I knew that they were kind of a standard mic, and I wanted my students to be able to use industry standard equipment for the most part as much as possible. So more Rode boom arms, more SM7Bs. We were trying to run into a computer for a while using like another big mixer, and the sound quality, it was in a more well sound treated space. Sound quality was okay. I wanted to start my own podcast, and that's where I was like, hey, I'll just take what I know, and I'm just going to run my VideoMic Pro into my Zoom H4n recorder from 2012. And that's how, a bunch of the show started. We'll actually be hearing about that a little bit later, believe it or not. And it worked really well until I wanted to start doing more. And it just so happened that like right at that time was when the RODECaster 1 came out. And having been through that experience of like trying to set up podcasting setups, those two district ones, plus other audio setups just over that time, plus my own podcasting setup. As soon as that came out, I was like, oh my God, this thing solves every problem, which is why I've always, I know there's people who just almost want only an audio interface, and they're just like, I just need an audio interface. I don't need all the bells and whistles. They basically just want to put a microphone into their computer, like an XLR mic. And the RODECaster is totally overkill for that. You can use it for that, and it's going to do all kinds of cool stuff, but it's definitely overkill. But sometimes you'll hear from those people in ways like, oh, this thing's expensive, it's a waste of money, it's a piece of junk. And I'm always like, no, you do not understand. If you've tried to set this stuff up before this existed, and then competing products came out, the nightmare that it was to try to set this stuff up and, oh my God, and have it work consistently and have it work simply. The RODECaster was an absolute lifesaver. So that's why I got it, and I love it, and I dove into it, and that's where I got my pod mic, which was like my first, like, this is a podcasting mic. It's like a dedicated pod mic. That's what then started my whole mic journey over the past, 3 or 4 years now. And it was really all thanks to the RODECaster Pro I, which is then, since I got it, has been on my desk, used basically every single day. I was able to equip my school studio setup with one too. And, it's something I'm a huge fan of because it's so cool. It really helps my workflow, and it's fun to use, and it makes things better. And the RODECaster Pro II is better in every single way. It's amazing. And, I've made tons of videos about it, and other people have made videos about it. So I don't think that's a surprise. Before diving in and talking about it, though, I do definitely want to address the upgrade thing, because this is one of the more popular questions I've been getting is, I just bought the RODECaster Pro I. What do I do? Oh, like that kind of thing, which I get. Like, if you just bought something and then the new version comes out, it sort of sucks. But you really need to look at your specific workflow. If you have the original RODECaster and it's suiting your needs perfectly, don't spend the money on an upgrade. Like, you don't need an upgrade. If it's not suiting your needs in some way, and it seems like the RODECaster Pro II can fill that gap, then consider upgrading. if you did just buy one, you're like, oh my gosh, like I literally just bought it. Do I upgrade? And I'm not even sure if I need to or not. I do think it's probably worth checking with like the place that you bought it if there's a return or an exchange period so you could exchange it for a new one. A lot of places are pretty understanding, especially reputable dealers. If you buy something and there's an upgrade immediately afterwards, they usually let you exchange it. So I think that's worth it if you literally just bought it like a week ago or something. And if you have nothing, if you don't own any of them and you're thinking of getting one, definitely get the 2 over the 1 just because it's, future proof, I guess. The first RODECaster Pro got a lot of firmware updates over its lifespan, but I don't think it's going to get any more. That's just me saying they could update it, but a big reason that the RODECaster Pro II exists for real, not just marketing hype, is that the original can't be pushed any further. Like it does not have the internal processing power to really do anything else. They can maybe make some interface changes, like change some colors or whatever, but why? It's pretty much refined and optimized as good as it could possibly be at this point, and I don't think we're going to see many more updates for it. But it's still really good. And the number of people I've heard say like Rode needs to keep supporting the one, like they need to support their users and all this stuff. I'm like, okay, maybe you did just buy it, but that thing has gotten like a dozen really good firmware updates over the past 3 years. You know how much firmware updates the competing products get? Somewhere between 0 and 1, maybe, over the course of their lifespan. So if you've used the RODECaster from day one to now, the way that it has changed and the way that they've been able to push it to do things that it was not designed to do is incredibly impressive. It's like the Apollo 13 mission where like they have this thing and they have to get it back to Earth just using what they have and somehow make it work. That's kind of what they're able to do with the RODECaster Pro 1. And then with the 2, it's like, okay, let's not only make it powerful enough to do everything we need to do right now, but let's also, knowing how things change in the future, let's build in extra power, extra functionality that we don't even know how we're going to use yet, but it's going to be there in the future when we need it. And that's really the benefit there. But that's kind of my upgrade spiel. So there are lots of cool features with the RODECaster Pro 2. And again, you're hearing all the audio through it. It is a little bit smaller than the original RODECaster, which I think actually makes a difference. Now that I've been using them both side by side for so long, I've adjusted to the RODECaster Pro 2 looks correct to me. Before it looked weird. They both visually, I think, look cool. They're pretty similar, but they're a little different. The 2 is just smaller, more compact. It's basically like if you chopped off the first channel of the original RODECaster, that's the size of the RODECaster Pro 2. It has a bigger display, and the display's positioned at an angle so you can see it more easily. Like right now, as I'm looking at both of these, the original screen, I can read it, but it's kind of like faded out because it's flat on the RODECaster. The 2 is angled up, so I can see everything on it super easily just having it on my desk. And of course, on the bottom of it, it does have a Versa vase. I don't remember. I mispronounced it, and you know what? I couldn't care less. It's got the mount where you can put the bracket and put it on an arm and stuff. Vesa. I can't remember which one it is, and people get really mad that I can't remember, and I don't care. So it doesn't matter. I'm not averse to giving a crap about that comment. So it does the thing. You put it on an arm, like you put it on a monitor arm, and it's also got a 3/8" mount in the back, which is very, very cool. I've been moving mine all around my setup and using it in videos, so I don't know how super practical it is to have on an arm, but it's something I might want to do at some point because it's great. It's a cool way to sort of save space and everything and make it really flexible. Beyond that, the biggest things with the RODECaster Pro 2 are the amps and the preamps. That to me is like it's not the biggest upgrade, but it's definitely going to be the most noticeable and right away. A huge thing is that it's important to understand, even though it has the same name and sort of the same form factor as the original, the 2 has been entirely built from scratch. Like every single thing, the entire physical design, the software, the processing, the firmware, all that stuff is entirely written from the ground up, which we'll talk about a little later. That's why there's been confusion with beta firmware prior to the release. And and all of the effects, all of the EQ, all the processing, even like the Aphex stuff, everything has been entirely redone, not just ported over from the original. So it's built from the ground up. And the big reason for that is that the original was designed for podcasting, which is why people like me loved it. But then it was also kind of co-opted by like a lot of the streaming community because it's really good for streaming. People were trying to do music with it, but it wasn't like really made for those things. And some firmware tried to make it a little better. With the 2, it's specifically designed for podcasting and streaming and music production. Not that you have to do all of those things, but none of them are an afterthought. And I think it's a very robust podcast recorder because, of course, but when it comes to the streaming and the music functionality, I think that's where we're going to see a lot of really big and really exciting updates as time goes on. So that's something I'm very, very excited about. But right now it works great. You can plug guitars, bass, whatever into it. It's got line level inputs, line level outputs, the combo jacks, so you can plug XLR or 1/4-inch jacks in the back, which is something I really wanted. Basically just awesome. But like I mentioned, my favorite thing or my biggest bit of joy is the better preamps in the RODECaster Pro II. So the mic preamps are significantly improved. They're so loud, or they have so much gain, clean gain to them that you don't need a booster with it. And Rode's claim is that they're so quiet that if you add a booster like a cloud lifter or a FET head, you're actually going to be introducing noise into the signal, not removing it. And I did test that out on my first walkthrough video, and I've just tested it out on my own while listening, and they're correct. It's not like a night or day difference, like the signal suddenly sounds like total garbage if you use a booster, but it does sound worse than without it. So why would you use one? Like, you could just plug any mic, including the SM7B that I'm using right now, which has a preset in the RODECaster Pro II, and I think that's really cool. So like right now you can see I'm using the SM7B preset. If you're watching the video version, you can see. And there's even like an image of an SM7B. There's also an RE20 preset, which I think is awesome because those aren't Rode mics, but Rode knows that their users use those microphones and might as well like help them sound their best. And you can create your own presets, which I've talked about in videos. So the preamps are amazing. They're super clean. You don't need a booster. So even though the RODECaster Pro II costs $100 more than the original, it's $699 instead of $599, potentially, depending on the microphone that you're using, if you don't need to buy a booster, especially if you think of someone who's running like 4 SM7Bs and then needed to buy like 4 FET heads or cloud lifters or something, that potentially saves upwards of like $400. If you're just a single person with a single booster on a channel, not as much. But I think that's very important to keep in mind. It's something that's always been a sticking point for me when I recommend any interface, is reminding people of like, yeah, the interface is this price, the mic is that price, but depending on the mic, you're probably going to need a booster. And that's where I get into conversations about you don't need a booster with a condenser mic, but then you have to talk about condenser versus dynamic. Now it's like whatever XLR mic you have, just plug it in the RODECaster, it's going to sound fine. And I love that. As someone who has to recommend these things, the ease of use, like knowing it's going to be easier for people to get it and get up and running and sounding good more quickly, I love that. So better preamps was definitely something. And one of the other biggest questions are headphone amps. So the headphone amps, that was a weak point on the original RODECaster Pro. The headphone amps are pretty noisy on this. I don't know if Rode is super happy when I say that, but I've talked to them about it too, and I know other people have mentioned it. There's a lot of hiss that comes out of the headphones. And once you've used it for a while, you can get used to it because you just know the actual recording and the actual output is going to be better and more high quality than what you're hearing through your headphones. But it can absolutely drive you crazy when you're setting up your recording and you hear hiss and you're like, is that just the headphone hiss or is that the microphones? Then you do the test recording and then you listen to it back and it's like, I heard people say that there were certain headphones you can use that sounded better with the original, but like that's really not that practical to then have to give people to have to buy new whole headphone setups when they buy the RODECaster and learn more about that. So it was a weak point. Like the headphone amps were just a weak point. The headphone amps on the RODECaster Pro II are perfect. Like what you hear out of them is exactly what you hear on the recording. They're dead silent. There's no extra hiss. What you're hearing, again, is exactly what you're hearing on the recording. And that makes it really helpful when you're recording stuff and when you're making stuff because you can monitor it more accurately. So that's a very, very big deal. And of course, there's all the cool functionality of like the smart pads. I don't really want to get into all that kind of stuff now, but I have learned that the smart pads are more sensitive. I didn't think this was the case at first, but they are to the point where if you can put drum samples and stuff on them, you could use this potentially as a drum pad. I'm still running the beta firmware right now as I'm recording this. So I haven't loaded I had all my custom stuff loaded, and then I had to reload new beta firmware and erase all of that. So I have this is like kind of default, because I know when the official firmware comes out, I'm recording this like the day before the official release. Then I'm going to have to update it again and erase everything again, because going from beta to not beta, that's just something you have to do. But anyway, those were huge features to me. The bigger functionality, the other big feature is the way that the channels work. So if you look at the RODECaster 1 and the RODECaster 2, one of the things that people initially notice is, hey, the RODECaster Pro 2 has 6 physical channels, but the RODECaster Pro 1 has 5, 6, 7, 8 physical channels. So we've lost 2 physical faders. Yeah, we have, but kind of not really. On the original, channel 1 is channel 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you have a USB channel, a Bluetooth, smartphone TRS channel, a Bluetooth channel, and your smart pads. On the RODECaster Pro 2, you have your 4 channels. You have up to 3 USB channels, because you have USB 1, USB 2, and USB chat. You have Bluetooth, and you have sound pads. So you actually have more than 6 channels, more channels than are on here, but you can swap them around. So right here on the screen, if you're watching the video version of this, there's a line that kind of divides the display screen on the RODECaster, and on the right-hand side, you have 3 channels, and on the left, you have your 6 channels. So there's 9 channels total, and you have virtual channels and physical channels, and you can go into your faders and you can just set these up. I'm not going to move anything while I'm recording because I don't want to risk messing it up. But you can, if I want to move the smart pads down or reassign things or rearrange my channels, I can do that however I want, which is why none of these are labeled. So for example, I'm keeping my smart pads and my sound effects and all those actions on the fader that's closest to the pads, because that's what I'm used to. But if I wanted, I could move that over to channel 2. And, if I have my mic and my sound effects and I don't want to deal with anything else, I could do it that way. So you can swap it out depending on how you're using it, individual shows, all that kind of stuff, which I think is very, very important. And sorry, I pushed a button and it confused me for a second. I was trying to get ready for some USB playback later. Anyway, you don't need to know about any of that. I'm also still learning a lot about the RODECaster Pro II, but the big thing is that the hype, I guess you could call it, is real. Like, it lives up to the hype and exceeds the hype in every way, and it's super exciting to see where things are going with it. I do have a few microphones set up here so we can do some mic comparisons, because I have been using the SM7B so far this whole time, and it is on the SM7B preset. But I also happen to have here the Rode Procaster, and I have it set to the Procaster preset. So let's switch from the SM7B to the Procaster. That's this one right now that I'm talking into. It definitely has a bit more high gain than the SM7B does. I'm pretty new to the Procaster, but I like it. I like it a lot. I'm actually super impressed with it. I don't know why I didn't have one for so long. And I was able to get this little pop filter. It's from a website called BSW. It's great because it doesn't it's not just the big foam one that goes over the top of the mic and then the mic just, I don't know. It just looks kind of funny, and I prefer this. This actually looks good and doesn't ruin the sound of the microphone. So once you're using the presets like I'm using right now, you can then go in and dial things in further. So let's see, I can show you even. If I go in here, I'm using the Procaster preset, but I can go into all of my settings and further adjust them if I want to. You have a lot of granular control over everything. And once I get it the way that I like, I can just save it as a preset. So I am actually using a preset that I made for the Procaster, which is basically the default thing, but I just sort of adjusted the noise gate a little bit to not be annoying, which is totally not true. The noise gate is so much better on this one than on the original one, which I just never even used it. This noise gate, it's usable. It's really usable, and it's worth spending the time to figure out how to make it sound its best. So this is the Rode Procaster. Now on channel 3, I have the pod mic, because that's, the pod mic came out with the RODECaster Pro. It really is if Rode were to sell a pack of like a podcasting pack, pod pack, it would probably be RODECaster Pro and 4 pod mics. So let's see how this sounds with the pod mic setting. This is the Rode Procaster. And I need to fix that XLR cable. This is not one I fixed the other day. This is the pod mic. That crackling was not the microphone. It was the cable that I'm using. The mic is just... Oh, I got to stop moving it. Sorry, I'm so sorry about that. A professional person would get rid of those things. But anyway, this is the pod mic. I think good God, we won't be on this for that long because of this cable here, but I will boost the gain just a little bit so you can hear the pod mic. The mic, I think, sounds really good. I think the setting in the RODECaster Pro II works. The pod mic does tend to lean towards the higher end frequencies a little bit more. So I've learned over the years that it doesn't necessarily work with every voice, but it can be EQ'd out if you add in some low end and kind of add in like a de-esser if that's what you need for your voice to make it work. And there are just some voices that it does naturally work really well on. But again, this is the pod mic. And this is the more expensive Procaster. I just didn't want to stay on the pod mic for too long because of the crackly cable that I now need to solder, which is fine because soldering is super fun. So the last mic that I have to share is the Rode NT1, which also does have a setting. So this is the Procaster. And now if I push the right button, this is the NT1. It's a great mic for NT1. Hello. And I am using the NT1 setting. I really love this microphone. It was the first condenser mic that I ever used. I guess besides like the Blue Yeti, but the first XLR condenser mic that I used. And it really helped me to love condensers because it's such a great sounding microphone, but also because using phantom power to power it, with a condenser mic, you don't need a booster pretty much on anything ever for the most part. There's some very, very niche situations where you could need a signal booster. Most of us will never be in those situations, so we don't need to talk about them right now. But this is the Rode NT1. Condenser mics run on phantom power. That means you don't need a booster, not just with the RODECaster, but with basically any other interface. So I think they make a lot of good economic sense. The only downside is they're not as good. It's not really a downside. It's just the quality of the microphone. They're not as good at rejecting. They don't reject as much environmental noise. It's just a quality of the microphone. It's not like a failing of the microphone. So if you're in a somewhat decently sound-treated space, a condenser mic could be a great choice. If you're in a not decently sound-treated space, then a dynamic mic is the way to go. And a dynamic mic would be something like this one right here, back on the Shure SM7B, which I'm going to stick with for the rest of the podcast today because it's on a boom arm and it gives me more free space to wave my hands around like a crazy person. So that's like the briefest overview of the RODECaster Pro II, but I know there's a lot of info out there. Go check my channel. If nothing else, I have tons of videos already about it. I'm going to be taking a break from RODECaster Pro videos for a bit just because I don't want people to think like I'm just a RODECaster channel, but I'll be doing a lot of like more specific feature related videos on it as time goes on and as I learn more about it and as new firmware updates come out and there's more to talk about with it. I'll be kind of, updating all that just as like an enthusiast of the RODECaster Pro. Like that's what I realized. I didn't realize how much of a fan I am of it until this came out, but I'm definitely just an enthusiast of the RODECaster Pro. And so the new one, super duper exciting. And now I guess we can let's talk about, I guess the other thing to bring up, there's a few things that have like come to mind. I mentioned firmware updates and people being upset that the original one probably won't be getting any new firmware updates. That's just speculation on my part. I'm not like privy to any info on that. But me trying to tell them, hey, no, it's already gotten like a dozen updates, which is almost a dozen more than anything else gets. It's maxed out. Like it's not marketing. They're not abandoning their users. They made a product. They made it as good as they possibly could. And now they needed to move on to a new thing. So it's still good, but it's just going to be the way that it is. The other thing is pricing. I mentioned that it's $699. And the amount of people who think I somehow have a role to play in global economics is shocking because I have no role to play in that. What I do know is that it's $699 in the US. I also know that the US does not post sales tax in prices. So one thing that happened, I was like, oh, it's $699. And I got like a barrage of messages and comments and emails from people telling me, no, it's not. It's way more expensive than that. Not realizing that in other places like Europe, you go into a store and the price on the shelf includes tax. So the price on the shelf is what you pay. In the United States, the price on the shelf is like the MSRP or whatever the store is selling it for. And then you still have to pay sales tax, which also sometimes includes on top of sales tax, like a local city tax or a state tax too. So the price on the shelf is not the end result. You can, if you're bad at math like me, you can roughly figure like add 10% to the price of something, and then that will be the price that you walk out with. So with that in mind, the actual price I would pay for the RODECaster Pro II in the US is pretty much the same as you would pay anywhere else. I have had other people say, no, in my specific country, after taxes, it comes out to, $900 US or $1,000 US. And it's like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, okay, don't buy it then. What do you want from me? Like, I can't do anything about that. Things cost different things in different places. Like, I think people are upset that I am talking about it as like, it's at this price. It goes back to that whole thing of like, just for YouTube and is this worth it or not? It's like, if you know what the RODECaster is and it fits in your workflow, you don't care, honestly, if it costs $600 or $900 because it's just worth it. I mean, I wouldn't pay $5,000 or anything for it, but if this came out, and originally I thought it was going to be so expensive because of how much more it has. If it was $900 or something, I would be like, yeah, okay, it's $900. That's fine. That seems worth it. The fact that it's only $100 more than the other one was mind-blowing to me. So, if you know what it is and it serves a purpose for you, you don't have that feeling of like, oh my gosh, it's way too expensive for me. If you don't really know what it is and you just kind of want everything to be cheap, like, I want the RODECaster for $100. Well, so do I, but that doesn't exist and it's not going to. So deal with it, I guess. That has been like my frustrating point is suddenly I've gotten thrown into the world of global economics in dealing with the RODECaster Pro II, and it's just not something that I'm involved with at all. But speaking of things globally, let's move over to a few messages from people. If you'd like to send a message, whether it's voice, video, or text, you can either email directly to tom@enthusiasmproject.com, or you can go to my website, hi-my-name-is-tom.com, and then right there on the homepage, there's a little link, and you can just click record and send a message right there, just using whatever mic on your computer or your phone or whatever you're using. You don't need to attach files or send anything. It's super, super easy, and we have a few of those. But first, we're going to start with a video submission. The reason I said globally is because this comes from the other side of the globe for me, from the homeland of Rode, from all the way in Australia. Here is a message from Bailey. Maybe.
Hey, Tom. So, as usual, once you've finished a podcast season, I go back to the very start of the entire podcast, episode 1. And then I go to the rest of to the end of the season as far as I can get. And I got up to about the end of season 3 or the start of season 4 from memory. And I wanted to talk about the progression of the podcast, not only in the equipment that you use, but also your persona and how open you've been. So the podcast first started with you using your video mic with the Zoom recorder. And that's how you did it for many episodes, because you didn't want to invest any money, which I completely understand. Then it changed to using the pod mic with the RODECaster, I believe. Correct me if I get that wrong. Anyway, throughout that change, it's always been about opening up. And obviously now when you started, you were a high school digital media teacher, and now you're a full-time influencer. And I know you hate that word. That's why I'm using it, just to annoy you. But I just wanted to say a massive thank you for encouraging me to not only start my own podcast, but also just for being amazing. I haven't been doing a whole lot of things creatively recently just because I've been very preoccupied with a lot of other stuff, as you know. But I definitely need to get back into it. Now, I'm going to quickly talk about what gear I'm using here, because I know you're a gearhead, I'm a gearhead, and I know a lot of people listening and watching might be too. So, we've got the Canon EOS M6 Mark II, filming this with a 15 to 45mm kit lens, which is an amazing lens. I really like it. We've got the Rode pod mic on the Rode PSA-1, and there's those plosives. Going into the RODECaster Pro, which is then recording in Audacity into my 2015 MacBook Air. Okay, I've got a joke for you because I'm using the RODECaster, so I can use my little rim shot sound. So you, as a previous high school teacher, know that controlling a class can be a bit difficult sometimes. Imagine how difficult it would be to control your pupils if you were cross-eyed. I've recorded this about 5 different times. I've said that joke every single time. Doesn't get any better. Anyway, thank you so much for being an awesome human, and I can't wait to see what season 7 brings.
All right. Thanks so much, Bailey, for that. I appreciate it very, very much. That was sent in before season 7 started, but then I wanted to put the episode with Peter Lindgren as the premiere because that was fun and different. And then last week I had recorded early before. So anyway, you sent this before season 7 started, Bailey, and it's on episode 3. It is what it is. Thank you very much for the kind words. Also, congrats. Bailey's had some really cool stuff happen in terms of opportunities and creative stuff for the future, which is very, very exciting. I'm very excited for you. And that is really like, I appreciate the thank you, but that's a good reminder to me and everyone else about the power of this stuff. We can get mired down into gear and sales tax in different countries or whatever, but ultimately it's like you can not just share your perspective and your ideas about things, but the way that you do it and the fact that you're doing it can also give people the motivation and the push and the idea to share things themselves. And then it just kind of, it goes on and on and on from there. And that means you can have a potentially very large positive impact on the world around you. And I appreciate that, even though you did use the term influencer. And also, Bailey, I'm glad you went through your sound setup there because you sound awesome on the pod mic and the original RODECaster Pro. It sounds amazing. So if you heard that and thought Bailey sounded great, guess what? Just because there's a new RODECaster, he's never going to sound less good. Like, he's only going to sound better because he'll probably learn more about the gear and figure out how to fine tune stuff. So you can it's still an awesome thing. Gear is very, very fun. And there are times when it can be a limiting factor. If you want a very specific, if you want super shallow depth of field on a mirrorless camera, you need a prime lens. It just is what it is, right? But if you just want to record video, then you can use a phone, you can use GoPro, you can use whatever. So it depends on what your needs are, what you want, how limiting the gear will be or not. But once you have a decent piece of gear, like, a good microphone, a good recorder, whatever, it's going to last a really, really long time. And it kind of takes the excuses away because then it just comes down to you doing what you need to do. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent now. Let's check in with some of our audio messages from SpeakPipe. I wanted to do something fun here, or at least I'm calling it fun because it lets me do... Oh, wait, sorry, Bailey. I wanted to go back. I apologize. The fact that you've re-listened to this entire series repeatedly, you've definitely heard more than me. Thank you, and I'm sorry. Because I can only... I mean, it's been such a fun thing to be able to do, but going back to like 100 episodes or whatever ago, it's been a journey, I guess we could just say there. But it's true, and the way that it started was just using what I happened to have, and then from there, adding new gear and upgrading as my specific workflow needs became apparent. Because, yeah, like, speaking of dad jokes, did you know that a regular joke becomes a dad joke when it's apparent? There we go. Anyway. Okay, we're going to go to these SpeakPipe submissions. We have 3 of them. And for these ones here, what I wanted to do was actually not listen to them before. Because sometimes, I learned when I was a teacher and we would do project critiques, and sometimes it'd be really fun to have students premiere their work for everyone. We all see it for the first time together, but sometimes bad things happen. And I learned very quickly, like, I should probably preview these first, and then, I'll have my feedback ready. And that's a fun thing to do a lot of times with like Q&A stuff is, okay, do I need to set anything up? Do I need to prep anything? But in this case, if you're able to go to SpeakPipe and just submit your thing and I'm able to listen to and reply, it's almost like we're having a delayed real-time conversation, if that's a thing. So we're going to start off with Gil, who has been featured on the podcast many times, and now he's on SpeakPipe. So here is Gil's message.
Hey, Tom. This is Gil. I hope all is well. This isn't a question. I just want to say I love the podcast, especially this season. You and Heather are an inspiration. Continue doing the great work, and have a nice one.
Thanks so much, Gil. It's always nice to hear from you. When you say this season, I know you meant season 6 because this was from a month ago. So appreciate that. Appreciate you. If you don't know Gil yet, you should definitely check out his YouTube channel or his podcast. If you just check up the Gil podcast, Guil, you definitely should feel guilty if you don't check it out. There it is. All right. Thanks so much. I appreciate the kind words, and it's super exciting to see he's doing like some amazing stuff. It's really fun. Up next, we have Alex Smith with a submission.
Hi, I'm Alex Jan Smith. Nice to meet you. This is me talking on my iPhone, and I have a new podcast called Alexa Podcast 101. And my phone likes to do random things sometimes, so just ignore that. And yeah, so yeah, I have a new podcast called Alexa Podcast 101. Nice to meet you. Have fun and good luck to all of you that are listening to this right now, and I would like to be on your podcast at some time, at some day, and I sometimes watch your videos for everything but everything about microphones, because I'm learning about microphones at the moment. So have fun, and yeah, just great. See ya.
Thanks so much, Alex. I appreciate that and the shameless self-promo. I appreciate the kind words and the time that you spend listening to podcasts, watching videos. Hopefully it's exciting to hear your voice on here. The big thing, though, that I will definitely bring up is background noise. Not just hissing things, but TVs and other people. Sometimes you got to make it work. So what I was thinking when it comes to Alex is he could have very easily decided like not to share something, not to submit something, not to reach out, but instead decided, even if it's not an ideal situation, to just go for it and do it. And I think that that's pretty cool. And obviously over time, you know, you wouldn't want to do a 90-minute podcast with a TV in the background or something, or people talking in the background. But to just kind of put yourself out there, get a submission, share something that's really cool. I think that's super exciting, and I appreciate it. And I'm honored to be a part of your podcasting journey. And up next, we have a submission from Ryan McLaren. And this was perfect timing because this was only a few hours before I started recording this episode. So let's hear from Ryan.
Hey Tom, was just listening to your podcast, one of your recent ones about the Blue Yeti, and you mentioned that if you were looking for around $100 microphone to get starting out, that you wouldn't recommend the Blue Yeti and you'd recommend something else. What was the other thing, like the other microphones you would recommend for around that cheapish price, like sub $100 for beginners and for like streaming and podcasting? Awesome show, and keep the good work up.
All right. Thanks so much, Ryan. I'm glad that you asked this question because this is a question I've gotten a lot since that Blue Yeti video blew up, and lots of people had the same question because in it I was like, oh yeah, the Yeti is not as bad as people think that it is, but in 2022 there are probably just some better choices out there that you could get right now. And I didn't give any specific choices. I probably should have said, here's what I would recommend. So here's what I would recommend, keeping in mind that the Blue Yeti is a USB microphone. And that's really its biggest strength, is because a USB mic is super, super simple. So ultimately, if you're somebody who's going to get into audio production and learning about microphones and all that kind of stuff, the world of XLR microphones really opens up just a lot more doors. So getting a nice little interface, not necessarily saying you got to get a RODECaster, but getting a Scarlett or something, or a Rode AI1, and getting set up with an XLR mic can be a great way to get started. But then you got to buy the interface and the microphone and a cable and probably maybe a booster. And that can quickly add up in terms of cost. Whereas a USB microphone, you don't need anything else. They usually come with a cable, and then you're all set. You never need a booster or anything like that. So my number one recommendation in that price point, actually less than that, would be this one right here. If you're watching, you probably recognize this. This is the Samson Q2U. I could plug it in, Let's not use the crackly cable from the pod mic over there, though. So I'm going to plug this in on the Procaster's channel, but I'm going to change my preset to just a dynamic microphone. Let's make sure this is turned on here. So right now you're listening to the Shure SM7B, and now you're listening to the Samson Q2U. The Shure SM7B is a $400 microphone. The Q2U is about a $70 microphone. So pretty different in price, but it's a really, really usable sounding mic. And this is just on the most generic like preset ever. Oh, I should definitely put a pop filter on there. But let's see, if we turn on the podcast studio preset, there we go. We got the Samson Q2U. The reason that I recommend this one is it is a very durable mic. It's not like the most exciting visually microphone. It kind of just looks like an SM58, I should say. So it's it's not that exciting visually, if that matters to you. To me, that it does. But the sound quality is great. The build quality is great. The price is great. The versatility is awesome. It is an XLR and USB mic, so it comes with a USB cable, but it also comes with an XLR cable, so it can grow with you, which is really, really cool. It has a headphone output built into it. It does come with a windscreen. It comes with a little tripod stand. It comes with like everything you need to get started, and it's really, really affordable. So the Samson Q2U is definitely something I would recommend to just avoid handling noise. Since the cable was pulling on the mic, I'm going to switch back to the Shure right now so I can surely sound my best. A couple other microphones though, if you don't want the Samson Q2U, the Rode NT USB Mini is $100, and I think that's a great microphone as well. The only downside to that, as I have mentioned in some of my videos, is that the NT USB Mini is so mini, it can be hard to position properly. So if you just like set it on your desk, it's probably going to be too far away from you. But if you have a way to put it on a stand or put it on a boom arm and position it really close to you, which if you do notice on most of Rode's marketing materials for the NT USB Mini, it is on a boom arm that is like very close to somebody. And it's super cool because the stand, it comes with like a yoke and a stand, and the stand is just magnetic, and then you can just attach it to a boom arm really easily or a mic stand. If you can position it close to you, it sounds outstanding, and it's really, really good. I'm not going to test it right now because it's a USB mic, and currently, one of the big questions with the RODECaster Pro II, does it work with USB microphones? Currently, the answer is no, but I say currently because that would not surprise me to see that change in the future. And I'm trying to think of some of my other recommendations. I had a whole nice list a while ago. And I can't think of them now. The big one that I like to recommend, like my go-to mic recommendation for a long time, has been the MV7, the Shure MV7. It's not the cheapest though. So the Yeti, $100, $120, the MV7, $250, maybe a little less depending on where you get it from. But it's a stellar sounding microphone. It works great on USB. That's what Heather has in her office. She just uses the MV7 on the USB setting. And like the Samson Q2U, it has the dual functionality of USB and XLR. So you can use it in a bunch of different ways. It means it's very, very tough to outgrow, very, very tough for your workflow to outgrow it. And because it's kind of like the pod mic where it has like the built-in yoke that can mount really easily and position really easily. That's a great one. If you're just looking for other USB mics, I've had pretty good experiences with the Fifine microphones. I have a review on one of them. I think it's the K669B. It was like $35 or $40. It works great, and it sounds awesome, and they're pretty inexpensive. They're not like super feature rich or anything, but I think they're easily as good, if not better sounding than the Yeti, and they're about half the price. So if you just want like basic USB mic, I think Fifine makes a Fifine lineup of microphones, and then you can jump up into like the Samson Q2U. There's the Samson Q9U, which is like their bigger SM7B looking brother, and then you can jump into like the Shure MV7. Those are kind of my recommendations. But also, I should say, if you just like the Yeti and it's going to work for you, and you like the sound quality, and you're in a setup where you can be close to the Yeti, there's really nothing wrong with going for it, despite like what you might hear online. So appreciate that question very, very much, Ryan. Thank you for calling me out on stuff that I did not include that I should have included. So let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about working with Rode on the RODECaster Pro II. And I sure hope I'm not out of line here, but I'm only going to say positive things. So there we go. Basically, what happened was in February, Rode reached out to me and said, hey, there's something really exciting. We need to sign all these non-disclosure agreements before we can tell you about it. And I was like, okay. And then, they showed me, we did some video calls where they showed me the RODECaster Pro II. Like actually got to see it. And it was like a virtual tour where I could be like, hey, can you what happens at that button? What's that thing do? And they could just show me. I was like, wow, this is amazing. That was in February. And what I learned is just how a company works with launching. This was Rode's first time announcing a product before it was launched. Typically, they'll tease something like, ooh, something exciting coming next week. And then they're just like, hey, now we have headphones. You can buy them right now. This was the first time they've done kind of almost what like Apple does with, here's a product announcement, but it's not shipping for a month or whatever. And it makes sense that they would do that because the product they're working on, it's a flagship item and it's so popular and it's in such a competitive space and it does absolutely just dominate that space entirely. So that was very, very exciting. And we were talking about it, going back and forth for a while. And basically, like there were scheduling things that pushed the release to, I don't know if it pushed the release. That's probably not even fair to say. But originally in February, they said, yeah, maybe sometime in late April or early May. It ended up not being announced until late May and then released in mid-April. So there's a million reasons that kind of thing can happen with production. Also remembering that Rode designs and manufactures them all right there in Australia, which is very, very cool. So I know they're also dealing with getting parts and supply chain things and manufacturing stuff. But the thing that I really learned, so initially what happened, and the really, really cool part is that Rode sent out, they were pretty discreet about who they were sending these out to. And I appreciated that they also said they didn't want a wave of embargo videos. They didn't want the thing where it's like the new release came out and now here's 50 of the same video. Like, so they were like, we're going to pick like 10 people around the world that we think would offer cool perspectives. I think they tried to pick people who were like, here's some podcasters, here's some streamers, here's some musicians, so we can have all those different perspectives, and then just let people do what they will with it. And I think that was really, really cool. The thing that sort of like threw a wrench in it was the firmware. So if you notice when the RODECaster Pro II was announced, there were a bunch of people, including me and Heather. We did a live stream. We had our Rodecasters, but they had no working firmware in them. And that seems, what that comes down to is just Rode's insanely high quality control. And I think this is 100% speculation on my part. I think they were just being extra conservative with, even though something is beta firmware. Even though something is beta firmware, sometimes people can be confused if something goes wrong. So when they're using a beta piece of software or firmware, that means it's not finalized. That means things could be incomplete. There could be bugs. There could be glitches. I feel like most people are aware of that, especially the people they would send these to. But I can also see you have this new product. You want it to launch really well. If someone does a live stream with it and it does a weird glitch or something, it's very easy to go, oh, it's beta firmware. That's not going to be there in the actual release. But it's also very easy for people to take something out of context and then post it as like, oh, this thing is going to be terrible. And I think Rode was very hesitant to release beta firmware to anybody. They wanted to release the actual firmware early to everybody, like the release firmware, and then people could make their content and stuff. And I think they were just hesitant to do beta firmware just for fear of things being taken out of context. But unfortunately, what that meant was after it was announced and everybody's excited about it, there were questions about like, why aren't we seeing like working ones anywhere? And so Rode was nice enough to ask me if I wanted to test the beta firmware. And of course they explained like beta means it could have, issues and stuff. And that's where I learned, that's one of the things that made me like Rode even more, was because I have had no issues with beta firmware. I mean, they told me stuff like one of the effects in the first beta version wasn't in there yet. So it was like, oh, like don't try to use that because it's not going to do anything. Like nothing is loaded into that effect yet. Okay, that's not a problem. But in terms of reliability, usability, sound quality, I'm using beta firmware right now, honestly. It has not given me any problems whatsoever. It's been incredibly solid. But I can understand why they wouldn't want to take the risk of, if you send it out to all these people and they're trying in all these different ways, something could go wrong and something could get taken out of context. What they wanted to be super clear on was that the release firmware was going to be absolutely like rock solid, but they were building the code again from the ground up. And I think they're just nervous about beta stuff. So that's why they reached out to me and said, hey, well, we want to have user content out there, but we don't want a bunch of beta firmware getting out there. So can we give you beta firmware and then you can test it out and use it and make some videos with it if you want? And I was super excited about that. So for me, what that meant, this is my like one bragging point, for a period of time, maybe like a week and a half, outside of Rode, I was the only person in the world with a working RODECaster Pro II. And that was really cool. And I felt really guilty also because I knew some of the other people that had them. And I was like, I feel guilty if I can make my video about it, but you can't. And we're doing the same thing. And so I had to I had to send a few messages, just make sure people knew that I felt bad, but also this was a really cool thing. And the reason for it too is like, I can be excited about new products. So I can talk to you about the Samson Q2U and say like, this is a really cool microphone. It does all kinds of cool stuff. It sounds good and it's at a good price point. But the enthusiasm and the experience and like the life journey that I've had with the RODECaster is very unique to that. It's like how I've done Artlist sponsored videos on my channel. And a thing that I mention whenever I do those is that Artlist was the first money I invested into my YouTube channel. I think that that's important. That's something that not everyone else can say, I should say. It's a really important part of my journey with them that helps my connection with that brand and that product and that service be kind of more meaningful and more authentic. Now, of course, I can't say that about it. There's only one thing that can be the first money I invested, right? So I think the same thing is true with the RODECaster Pro. Like my affinity for it, my enthusiasm for it is very genuine because it came from a genuine journey of just like, I'm excited for this thing. I'm going to buy it as soon as it comes out. And then it got to a point where it like, I guess I was able to share that with people who also got really excited about stuff. That would be why if a company goes like, hey, we want someone to talk about this thing, let's go to the person who's like, the most excited about it. But the downside, of course, is I can't speak like that on every product. Like I can tell you this microphone is cool, but I'm not going to have that same level of connection with it that I do with this. So I think it's kind of a give and take thing because some of the people who didn't get the beta firmware as early as I did are also, more experts in other areas and will get more access to things than I would in those areas. I hope that makes sense. So I hope it balances out. I just felt really guilty. But it was really cool. It was a fun thing to be able to like, oh my God, I can actually make stuff with this and showcase it. And it was cool to like have, people asking questions because they didn't see it in any of the release videos or something. And then I could actually test it out and ask them, of course, reminding them all that it's beta firmware and things could change for the actual release. But again, like I said, my beta firmware is completely fine. And that just showed me how dedicated Rode was to making the thing as good as possible, which also goes back to some of the conversations we had about, I was asking him like, oh, the RODECaster 1, like, they were explaining that like literally they tried pushing it as far as they possibly could. And they were very proud of how far they could push it. But if they wanted to take things further, they needed new hardware. They needed new computing, more computing power, more just everything in order to make it more adaptable. Because, in the 4 years since the original's release, things have changed so much and the user base has changed. And they are pretty darn good about listening to the community and how the community is using things. And then, creating something that suits all of those people. So they took everything they learned from the original, built the second RODECaster Pro II, and then also, as I mentioned earlier, built in like more space. It's like buying a house that's bigger than they would need, but knowing that in a few years they might need those extra bedrooms kind of a thing. That's basically what they did with the RODECaster Pro II. I know that they're very excited for some firmware functionality that's going to be added in future updates. They've mentioned that on their channels, but I also know that stuff is unpredictable. And so people get this thing and start using it in a year. People might be using it in a cool way that nobody could have predicted. And then Rode can have the headroom to adapt to that and like, create updates that they don't even expect to create right now. And I think that their main priority for the launch is just making the 1.0 firmware, making sure that when everybody gets that on launch day, or everybody got that on launch day, that it was as reliable and solid and sturdy as absolutely possible. Same thing with the RODECaster Pro II itself. Designing and manufacturing something from the ground up is probably pretty hard. And that's what I've seen over the past February through June. That's a lot of months. What I've seen over that time is genuinely how much they care about this. They care about the users. They're excited for it. They want it to go really well. There were some rumors, or before the RODECaster Pro II was announced, there was a website, a store that accidentally posted the product page and leaked some images, and then it got picked up on rumors websites, and that stuff happens. And in the end, I guess you could argue that it generates good press, but I also know that it was kind of a bummer to people who'd been working on this thing, that they were really excited. It was this is going to be a big, fun surprise, and then we can be excited about it for a few weeks and start shipping them out. And the wind kind of got taken out of that sail by rumor websites and stuff, and that's kind of a bummer. So definitely made me approach differently how I think about that. The other tricky part for me was Rode told me about this, I think it was February, the end of February, and didn't come out. It wasn't announced until the end of May. So there was that period of time where I knew a new one was coming out. Legally, I couldn't say anything about it, but I was also constantly getting asked, should I buy the RODECaster? Do you think Rode's going to update it? And that was really, really hard. That was a situation I didn't expect to find myself in and to navigate. And I think I learned a lot from that. So what you'll notice is I think it was February, basically the time I found out there was going to be a new RODECaster Pro, I didn't make any more RODECaster Pro I videos after that. It's there, people know I use it, but I'm not making a dedicated, here's how to do this on the RODECaster, here's a RODECaster long-term review, and nothing like that was happening anymore. And I didn't want it to come across as wow, he's selling me on this thing. I'm going to go buy it in early May, and oh gee, now the new one's coming out. I can't do anything about all the other videos. It's still a good product. So if someone watched an old video from 2 years ago and then bought it because of that, they still got a good product. But I was not actively creating new content about it. And then the tougher part was so many people asking, I think because of the Mixcast coming out and all the competing products, people I want a Mixcast. Do you think Rode's going to update the RODECaster? And so what I had to do was kind of think, okay, if I didn't have the knowledge that I have, I didn't have this curse of knowledge, what would my answer be? And then give that answer. And my honest answer in those situations was that, Rode isn't going to tell us if something's going to be updated or not, but looking at the past, seeing that the existing one is 4 years old now, there's a lot of competition in this space. It really wouldn't surprise me to see an update at some point in the future was kind of my go-to thing, because that is what I would have said if I didn't know anything about it. I was yeah, it's been 4 years. Competition in this space is getting pretty fierce. It really wouldn't be surprising to see them do something new, especially because there hadn't been a new feature-heavy firmware update on the RODECaster Pro I in a while. There have been a lot of them, more than anything else, but it had been a while since a new one came out. So even before all this, I was kind of thinking, yeah, I think that's why it's maxed out. And if you remember, they did a firmware update a year or two ago that had a reverb effect in it, but then reverb was taken away from the final release. And it just kind of goes back to there wasn't enough processing power. It could work in the beta, but it's not about, with something like this, it's not about, yeah, I can kind of do this, but it's going to potentially cause problems. They need it to be rock solid reliable, because the last thing you want is to put this product out there and people start using it, and now it's crashing their streams, it's corrupting their recordings. They use it, someone books an interview that's huge for their show and they spend 60 minutes recording it, and then the file gets randomly corrupted or the processor freaks out and messes everything up. It needs to do everything that it says it can do exceptionally well. And that's the thing with both RODECasters, but even with all the claims on the RODECaster Pro II, it literally meets and exceeds all of them. And then they're just going to keep adding new stuff in. And what I've learned, another thing I've learned, is that by the time it's in an actual release version, it's so good and so reliable, and so much effort and so much work has been put into it that you can definitely count on it. Now, if you do have ideas, because I also have now become Rode's unofficial tech support and feedback form, which is not necessarily a position I wanted to be in, but if you have ideas or you run into workflow issues, like you should reach out to them. They're super open. Like if you can go to their website and do the contact form, you can just message them on social media and just say, hey, I have this idea that I think would be cool in the RODECaster. And it's not that they're necessarily going to take your idea because one person said it and then go, a whole team is going to code a new firmware update for it. But if a lot of people do it, it makes sense. If you use the Rode Wireless Go and you have the Interview Go, which is a little microphone thing that the transmitter clips onto, and then it looks like you're holding a regular reporter's microphone. That came because when the Wireless Go came out, a lot of people were clipping it to like spatulas and stuff and using it as a microphone, which is really funny. But Rode saw like people are liking to use this as a handheld microphone, but they don't have a good way to do it. Let's make a thing that lets them use it as a handheld microphone. Like they really do pay attention to the community. It's really great that like if you call Rode's customer support and you talk to someone in Australia, they can literally look out their window and see the factory where the stuff is being made. The people who are designing the RODECaster Pro II can, on a regular basis, just walk into the factory and see it being produced. They don't have to like go to an overseas thing, and like the level of hands-onness to all the products from start to finish is huge. And I can just personally attest that like the love and care and effort that goes into them is through the roof, and it is endeared Rode to me as a company even more than it did before. So that's my ode to Rode. Nice. Should have called that. Maybe that'll be in the title of this episode. Anyway, I think that about wraps it up. We've talked about the RODECaster Pro II. I'm going to take a bit of a break from RODECaster content for a while because I want to continue being excited about it and not like tired of it. Plus, I also need to like learn more about it and how to use it, and then I can do my long-term review once I've had the official firmware for a long time and can work on it that way. But it's awesome. If you're getting one, you'll love it. Definitely feel free to send a message, tom@enthusiasmproject.com, or just go to hi-my-name-is-tom.com and do the little speak pipe record thing that's right there on the homepage. You can send in a message for a future episode. Next week is going to be episode 4, and then episode 5 after that will be a Q&A episode, so I might kind of save a bunch of messages for there, but I'll also be putting out a call to Q&A. Anyway, my brain is broken. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I really, really appreciate it. I hope you had some fun. We laughed, we cried. I cried. And I hope you have a safe, happy, healthy, fun rest of your week. And I will see you next time.